So welcome everybody to this session with Rachel Mortlock on progressive writing opportunities. Welcome to the Early Years Stronger Practice Hub. We're really delighted that Rachel's joining us for a series of webinars and a couple of face-to-face days. I think this is the fourth one in the series, Rachel. We have recorded her previous sessions, so if you want to watch those back, they are on our YouTube channel. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Rachel, but before I do, Rachel will be showing some films that are taken from Siren Films. We are offering a annual subscription free of charge to anybody who attends these sessions. So if you if you're interested and you haven't already got one, I will post the link to register for that in the chat. If you want to fill that out, you can then be provided access with a year's worth of subscription for free of charge, and you will be able to watch the videos that Rachel shows in this session. She creates a playlist so you can access that, and they're all together in one place, which is really helpful. So Rachel, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce the session, and I'll pop back right at the end just to close the session. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. If you want to switch your cameras off, please do, because we're going to be recording the session. I will probably appear and disappear from the screen at different points. But what we're going to look at today is progressive writing opportunities in the provision. So we're going to look at the skills and knowledge required to become an early writer and how a supportive and learning environment and really skilled adults can enable that. And we're going to look at practical ideas, looking at really the whole process of learning to be a writer, thinking about the physical thinking and language skills required to take children from being very young babies and developing from mark makers into confident, independent writers. We are going to be using extracts from Siren Films. If you haven't taken the opportunity to have the login, then please do, because it is absolutely fantastic in terms of being able to access a whole different range of videos. I've just chosen some, but there's absolutely loads on there. And particularly if you work with younger children and babies, there's some wonderful videos that you can see about how to engage with really young children as well as part of those. So we are, I will send you out a copy of the PowerPoint. It will be sent out by the Hub straight away after this. It has all of the materials that you're going to see. It has the links to the videos, and it also has the presenter notes, which have links to further information. For example, some of the DFE information and links that we talk about in terms of this as well. So the EYFS framework says that writing involves transcription, spelling and handwriting, and composition, articulating ideas and structuring them into speech before writing. And writing is a really central activity in the early years and later school curriculum. And the DFE says formal writing before reception is not necessary. However, you can provide lots of meaningful opportunities for children to learn and write about the written word and to support them to understand that symbols carry meaning. And if we think about writing, there's a quote on the screen from a book called Learning About Writing, which is really interesting. And it talks about how writing, like all other aspects of language, is a social process that happens in different ways, in different contexts, and in different cultural groups. So when children start to learn about writing, different societies have different rules, different characters. Do they write left to right or right to left? Do books go from back to front? And writing is really dependent on the use and understanding of speech. And the use of understanding of speech depends on the acquisition of language. And this links to early brain development and children's exposure to language. And alongside that, children need to be able to have the gross and the fine motor skills to be able to support them in terms of that writing. But they also need to understand why we write and why we need to write, and the social aspects of writing. So, for example, a list might be written by more than one person. Some writing's kept, some writing's thrown away. That sometimes things are really important. We say, don't disturb me, I'm doing this writing. That some writing might be learnt off by heart. and that some is collaborative with lots of talk, and that some writing is solitary as part of that. And when we're thinking in more detail about the process of learning to write, it's a developmental process that takes children, and what we're going to look at today is birth to key stage through foundation stage. But the journey of writing is a journey that takes children all the way through into key stage 1 and beyond. It really isn't till the age of 7, perhaps, that children have collected that whole group of skills that they need to be able to actually write and write independently as part of that. So at different parts, children will be on different stages of that journey, and within a class and a group of children, children will be at different points within that as well. And it's a little bit, if we think about learning to ride a bike, for example, the skills of a 3-year-old will be really different to the skills that a 7-year-old might have in terms of that. So if we're looking going through by the end of by the end of reception, the early learning goal talks about children writing recognizable letters, most of which are correctly formed, spelling words by identifying sounds in them and representing the sounds with a letter or letters, and writing simple phrases and sentences that can be read by others. And if we think about the journey that children go through from the start, and remembering that it's not necessarily hierarchical, and some children may go through this journey in a slightly different way, but it's about the starting with speech and early communication, about how children learn to talk in sentences, what we might call oral composition, about how they develop the physical skills, the gross and fine motor, their hand-eye coordination linked to their brain development, about really developing an understanding of meaning, both spoken and written, about starting to develop the secretarial skills that they need in order to be able to write. And we're going to look at this in more detail, including cracking the code and learning phonics, about really starting to develop fluency in their writing and starting to develop those writing conventions. And that does happen in early years, but the journey carries on beyond that. But what we often see in early years, particularly I think when children move into reception, is that there can often be a bottleneck where children have some of the knowledge that they need in order to be able to understand how words are made, and they're developing their phonic knowledge, but there can be a real bottleneck when taking some of those phonic skills of reading into writing for children. So we're going to explore that as well. So if we think about the importance of having language for thinking, so language from the very earliest babbling of babies through to that development of thinking processes, and thinking processes are dependent to a considerable extent on the language use of children. And children need to understand that words both spoken and written carry meaning. And that development of that writing, thinking process and that writing process depends to a considerable extent on their language knowledge and their language use. So we talk a lot about children being exposed to language-rich environments where adults talk to children, where they explicitly develop the vocabulary that children need, where they model conversation, they model sentences to children and talking to children. And if we think about the development of children, depending on where they are at different ages, if we look at the youngest children, they will play on their own. Their speech will often be a monologue or egocentric speech based around them. And then as they become older, they will move into from playing individually to parallel play, maybe playing alongside another child, maybe even using the same resources, but not necessarily playing together. And then they will develop into that cooperative play and working with their peers. And as we see that, we see that their language development at the same time, developing from that very functional language centered around them that we see with younger children, for example, of I want, to maybe the imaginative language that we might see in play about, the dinosaur ate the boy, and modeling that through their play. And as we go through that, we're supporting them to develop their oracy skills, so the ability to express themselves fluently and grammatically in speech, and their literacy skills, the ability to read and write. And as we move forward and support children, we need to have a focused approach to that, and it needs to be planned and purposeful. So we're going to look at the first of our videos, and we're going to start to look at the link between how we develop language with early children and the importance of books. So this is the first of the videos that we're going to show. Some of them are shorter, some of them are longer, and you will be able to access these yourself afterwards.
In children's own home, parents should never underestimate how much children learn when they are part of ordinary activities.
Shall I make a list of what we need from the shops?
Yeah.
As well as having the physical skills for mark making and being able to listen carefully to the sounds that make up words, children also need to know what print is for. This is usually learned from interacting with others using print.
I better write it.
I don't like it.
Will you write one thing and then shall I write the rest?
Mum needs to write a shopping list, and Ava's keen to have a go and pretends to write.
You do the rest. You do the rest.
Thank you.
What children need to understand, bit by bit, is that there are a load of marks, which initially looked to them just like squiggles, which are writing. They are words. Words say something.
What do we need? Cocoa Pops. You think so?
She's beginning to understand that the squiggles that are written on paper represent different things.
Like you.
Right, you.
Like you. Like Mummy was. I'm like Asa.
I know it was right, Mummy and Ava. Okay. Can you see where have I written Ava?
These two words are important ones to Ava.
Yeah.
That's right.
But where you put you?
I haven't put me on yet. I'll put me under there.
Where is it?
Can you find that? Which one says Mummy? Yeah, that's right.
Later, at the supermarket, Ava finds the cereal box that they put on the list.
Children learn an awful lot about recognising familiar packets or signs because they go shopping with you, they work out how we walk to the market, they start to recognise familiar words and logos.
What's that?
There it is!
What's that?
Teleport.
Did you want some still?
It is just as important when children start to spend some time in out-of-home care, like nursery or playgroup, that those ordinary experiences are also recognised and valued.
Ava's becoming familiar with the uses print has and understands that it carries a meaning. She's really making sense of print.
That's pretty walking.
What children need to see over early childhood is that their familiar adults, so their parents, but also their early years practitioners in nursery, that we as adults use our reading and writing skills. We need to be a really good working model that it is so useful to be able to read and write.
So I think that's one of the key messages coming out of that we need to be modelling experiences for children. They need to see practical purposes for us writing, and they need to see us regularly writing, and we need to do that as part of that thinking aloud process and explaining what we're doing for children. And I always remember I was driving down the motorway with my daughter when she was just 3, and she suddenly shouted out Tesco, and I sort of looked around thinking I can't see a Tesco, and I realised it was a Tesco lorry went past us. So she'd recognised Tesco from me saying we're going to go to the supermarket to go to Tesco. She'd recognised she couldn't read at that point. She'd recognised the symbols and the logos of Tesco, and she'd applied that when she saw the Tesco lorry going past us on the street as part of that. So it's really important that children have that environmental exposure. So before children can write independently, they need to be able to say aloud what they want to write. So it's really important that we expose them to a wide range of different written text and oral storytelling, and we really increase their vocabulary, because this expressive and receptive language develops through talk and through listening. So it's really important that we place a high value on storytelling, and we have plentiful opportunities to not only tell stories to the class or the group of children as a whole, but to share books. And when we're sharing with books, that's when we're sitting down with a really small group of children, 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, to actually be able to talk in detail about what we can see in those books. Opportunities to ask and answer questions. It enables children to explore a world behind their own experience, but it also allows them to start to see the structure of the written word, the structure of stories, about how those stories and rhymes have sentence structures. It supports their vocabulary development. They start to see pattern and rhyme. They can start to play with language. They start to understand what engages them as a reader. And so when they become a writer, what makes a story become engaging? They start to understand that a story has a beginning and a middle and an end. And they move from reading and sharing books to starting to be able to orally retell stories themselves. And there's opportunities to encourage them to orally retell stories. You might have very simple puppets or characters that go with a book. There might be opportunities in a small world role play or a larger role play for children to be able to retell and learn those phrases so that they become storytellers themselves. Because until they have those oral skills, that oral composition, and they can retell the stories, they're not, even when they start to learn the phonics and the stages that come later, they're not going to be able to write unless they have that understanding of story and being able to tell stories. And it's really important that we expose children to books from the start. And this is a lovely video showing that it's never too young.
Bobby, would you like to talk on like a pyramid? Region is so we don't take the best of it, some people will be reason they're going to read us a story all of that. Hello. He started to look at himself. And it was that face. Strawberries. Orange is one piece of coffee bean, one ice cream for one pepper, one slice of Swiss cheese, one slice of salami, one lollipop, one piece of cherry pie, one sausage, one cupcake, and one slice of watermelon. How sweet is it? The next day was Sunday, and the Casbah ate one nice cream.
So what we saw in that video there was books from the start, books that aren't just in a book corner, books that are out in the provision for children. We saw the practitioner sitting down, following the children's interests, responding to the book, sitting and sharing the book, not necessarily telling the story as it's written. She's a little bit of it was telling the story, but picking up on it, looking at the pictures and discussing with children. And children start to learn the conventions of books. So they start to learn that words, the symbols and the words have meaning, that text goes from left to right, how we turn the pages within the book. So it's really important that we expose children to books from the start and that we have books across the provision. And I think as we go through, we're going to look at some pictures of some different provisions and examples of what books look like in terms of that. So when we're thinking about the physical development process that that children go through, it's really important to understand that. So if we're looking at really young children, so if we're looking at children from the age of 10 months to 1 year in terms of their physical development, if you watch them, they tend to pass objects from one hand to another. They hit objects and they might follow a moving object with their gaze. If we're looking as they get slightly older, their physical development moves on. They can drink from a cup, they can lift and move objects, they can start to put some clothes on independently. By the time we get to 3 or 4, they can use basic tools such as scissors, they can build towers, they can turn the pages of a book, they can start to dress and undress, and they start to draw recognizable images and figures. So it's important to recognize that if we want to be a writer, it's linked to the physical development. And so it's important to have an understanding of the physical development stages that a child is at. So we're going to have a look at the importance of gross motor by looking at this video.
Physical play starts in babies. It's simple at first as babies kick their legs and wave their arms in a rhythmic way, helping the muscles and nerves to develop and mature. At this stage, adults often encourage physical play by bouncing and throwing babies in the air. As they become mobile, what's called exercise play soon develops. It comes to include a great variety of forms, and each is beneficial in different ways. Gross motor play involves large muscle movements and full body coordination. It includes things like jumping, bike riding, climbing, rough and tumble, running and chasing. By the time children are 4 or 5, they typically spend about 20% of their time playing in a physical way. Most of these activities can be done alone, but usually happen in a social environment where children are playing with and learning from another child or adult. How does this highly motivating play benefit children? Physical play makes children healthy, confident, and happy. Playful activity releases endorphins, giving a feel-good factor. Everybody needs healthy exercise, and children in particular need it to build up their muscles, lung capacity, and endurance. Evan's getting really out of breath, but he's so engrossed in his game that he doesn't stop running. Children need to have good control of their bodies, and those that do tend to be confident and have high self-esteem.
Yeah, okay.
At birth, they seek out physical activities that their body and brain need to develop optimally. brain is gradually building up a body map. It needs to know where the limbs are, where the body ends, what the muscles feel like under pressure, how it feels when it's moving and in different positions. Children love being thrown into the air, going upside down, spinning and rolling and balancing along things. All of these kinds of movements develop their sense of where the body is in space. It's known as the vestibular sense. By the time we're adults, this sense is usually fully developed, so activities like this may feel unpleasant.
Makes me feel a little bit dizzy. I don't really like spinning round.
But I want you to.
I know, but I don't really like it.
But I want you to make the house move.
A house move? I'll make the house move. It does feel like the house is moving.
It's the disorientated feeling that is helping the visual system to connect up with
And then
balance.
stand still. And does it look like everything's moving?
Yeah.
Movements like pushing, pulling and lifting put the muscles under pressure. Jack prizes his body upwards and messages are sent to the brain so that it learns what it feels like. It also lets him know where the parts of his body are in relation to each other and the floor.
Jack, big jump. Jump. Dad.
Oscar's brain will be receiving messages from his muscles as it learns where different sets of muscles are and how they feel when they're under pressure. These types of movements are developing the proprioceptive sense. The stimulation of these senses together with the visual and tactile senses lead to the brain being able to build up this detailed body map that's needed for competent physical activity and especially for learning new physical skills.
Wake up now. Hop your bunnies up, hop, hop, hop your bunnies up, hop.
Musical processes are inherent in the human brain, and rhythms are associated with movement. As we've seen, babies love being bounced, and together with the rhythm of song, it provides a powerful stimulation for rhythmic movement.
He takes us with and the wheels go round. Giddy up, we're homeward bound.
This inbuilt musicality and response to rhythm and musical sounds develops into dancing and music making. It's a basic human bonding mechanism that encourages more and more refined physical skills. Imitating physical movements uses more specific skills as the boys try to emulate what they see.
Take care, not too fast.
Oh, beautiful. I like the way you're dancing.
Dancing involves using additional areas of the brain and other physical movements, as children learn to synchronize their movements with the music as their legs are moved through particular patterns in space. As Austin learns his dance routine, sophisticated neural structures are brought into play. Gross motor development, then, is essential for healthy physical development, motivating children to build up their endurance and physical strength. At the same time, the brain builds up a body map and learns to coordinate the various parts of the body in space. Innate musicality stimulates the brain in different ways as neural pathways become refined. All in all, this play enables children to become confident and happy in the control and use of their bodies.
So, if we're thinking about the physical development of children, it goes from big to small in terms of muscle development. So, from proximal to distal. So children develop the large muscles of their trunks and arms before the smaller muscles of their hands, and they develop the muscles that are closer to the trunk of their body center, so their shoulder muscles or their upper arm, before they develop the muscles which are further away, such as the hand muscles as part of that. And it's really important that if we want children to become writers, they've got to have that muscle control and that control over their bodies. And one of the things, quite often I'll go into reception classes and they'll say that the children really struggling with writing, so they haven't got those fine motor skills that they need to write. And one of the things that I often do them is a really basic sort of clapping game. And if they don't have the hand-eye coordination to be able to follow a really simple clapping pattern, so where you're sort of clicking your fingers, clapping, but particularly you're crossing over your body. So you might be touching your left elbow with your right hand and vice versa, touching opposite sides of the knees, crossing arms and legs, then they're unlikely to have that physical development that they need in order to be able to pick up that pencil and do the writing as part of that. And so it's really important that we understand how children's physical development contributes as part of this, and how we plan opportunities for children to develop physically from the stage at which they are. I've put a link to here. This is an taken from an NHS sheet about developing skills of children, but we want to develop the skills to use both sides of the body at the same time in an organized way. And so it's about understanding what children need to be able to do. So they need to be able to do hand and leg actions at the same time as jumping. They need to be able to do things like skipping or pedaling a bike. They need to have opportunities to have leading and supporting hand movements. So when one hand holds a piece of paper, for example, whilst a child's cutting at the same time. And so across the provision, and as children become older, we need to provide opportunities for all of this. And because children will be at different points in their development, then some children will still be needing these opportunities as they move through early years foundation stage. And that muscle control and that understanding how your body moves is absolutely essential to having those physical skills that you need to be able to become a writer. And it's about developing that control and that use of your bodies. It's about understanding the move from left to right and from top to bottom. So how do we support that? I think it's really interesting, and one of the biggest things we need to support gross motor skills is we need large spaces. So ideally outside, or a space inside that enables children to do that. We have to think quite purposefully about the resources that are available for children. So think about how they have opportunities to balance. Think about the different movements that they're going to make. So how are we going to encourage them to pivot their shoulder or move their elbow or move their wrist? Where are those opportunities for them to cross that midline? So they need to be able to cross the line of their body. So when we look at really young children and babies, they will tend to pick something up and move it from one hand to another in order to put it where they want it, rather than crossing that hand across the middle of their body. But if we want children to be able to write, they have to be able to cross the midline with that coordination. So thinking about opportunities for climbing and for pulling and jumping, like we saw in the video, lots of opportunities for clapping games, for following patterns, for songs, lots of opportunities for balls, for catching, for rolling. But again, thinking about about how do we do that. So we might be sitting opposite a child, for example, and we might deliberately be trying to roll the ball so it goes to either their left or their right side, encouraging them to roll or throw it back to us, starting with larger balls and moving down to smaller ones, having that same progression about knowing where that child is. And we know that when we're outside, we particularly engage boys in terms of that. And we also know that there's biological differences between children. When babies are born, boys actually have an advantage at that point, but we find within the education system, it disappears very quickly. And girls actually perform better than boys throughout the English education system, certainly as part of that. We also know some really interesting thing about boys. So if you're a left-handed boy, you're at greater risk of reading and writing difficulties, including dyslexia. So picking up on those things with young children really early and ensuring that support's put in place for them. So thinking about how we give opportunities and how we plan them purposefully. So if we're playing outside, for example, we might have ribbons, and you might have ribbons on a stick and you might be doing a pattern, but thinking very deliberately about the movements that you're going through as part of that, and thinking about how to develop it. Notice what children are doing when you're working with them. Notice the areas that they find more difficult and give them more opportunities to practice that. And there are lots of programs that you can follow as part of that. But one of the things I often notice when I go into settings is that the children will be doing the same sort of music. It might often be on a screen. They'll be doing the same kind of music videos. And it's great that they get to learn it and they get to learn the songs. But sometimes they're not as responsive in terms of the physical opportunities that are in there, or particularly those opportunities to respond to those individual children and what they're finding difficult. So having adults who are doing those activities with children, who are making them up as they go along, who are singing and moving with those children, is really helpful. And many years ago, there was a commercial program. I think you can probably still get it, but it's called Right Dance. I think it was Scandinavian, and it took through a very structured program of getting children to move from large movements to small movements, supported through dance and art. And it ran a course many years ago about this, and someone came to talk about it. And on the day of the course, the reception teacher from quite a small school couldn't attend. So the head teacher, because they'd wanted to attend this, came along. And the head teacher was very much a Key Stage 2 teacher. And I sat with him during the course, and he was absolutely fascinated by it. And it talked a lot about how children need to have that physical development before they can go into that gross motor skills, into that fine motor skills, before they can become those fluent writers. And about 6 months later, I saw him at a head teacher briefing, and he said, I did it and it worked. I said, what did you do and what worked? And he said that for many years, he'd taught Key Stage 2 catch-up, and he'd had this same particular group of boys in a writing catch-up session. And he said, really, they hadn't made very much progress in all the time he'd been working with them. So following that course, he decided to completely change what he was doing. So he stopped getting them sitting there with pieces of paper for 20 minutes going through, let's practice writing, let's practice this. And he started to spend initially the whole session, but then moving it into smaller sessions, focusing on ball skills, focusing on them getting to develop their gross motor skills, getting them to be able to throw and catch, improving their hand-eye coordination. And then he moved them through a series of smaller fine motor. We're going to look at some of those fine motor skills activities. And only then did he take them back into the writing. So they were boys who did have some understanding of the phonic code and writing, but really struggled with that, getting that down on paper. So he didn't focus on getting them to sit there with a pen and keep on writing more, but he focused on really how he could improve their gross motor skills and their fine motor skills. And he found that they actually made the strongest progress that they'd made in all the time that he'd been working with them. So I suppose if we're thinking about it, he'd identified where they had a clear gap in their past experiences and had filled that gap in. And I've told that story to quite a few people over time, and they've done the same. They've really focused on children who are really struggling with writing and composition and getting things down onto paper because they don't have the skills, the physical skills, about taking them back and trying to do catch up around some of those skills to make sure that they have that those physical skills and that hand-eye coordination. And we know that the differences between girls and boys are likely to stem from brain differences. So we need to really carefully think about when we're in that gross motor spaces, what big equipment do we provide, but also how do we encourage children within that to do those activities that are going to support that balance and are going to support their gross motor skills within it. Because I think it's about remembering that our role as adults is to model and support children. So knowing where children are, knowing what they need to do next and taking them on through modeling. And I think it's about thinking about, we saw in one of the videos where we saw the babies down on the floor, and about thinking about opportunities for children to also do physical activity on the floor. I know that lots of children really like if you have a table, lying underneath the table and sort of mark making upside down on a table as part of that, or thinking about how we put where we put opportunities and writing surfaces. And I think we've got some pictures of those as we go through. But what we're aiming to do is maximize those opportunities for physical engagement for children. And the government guidance is that at this age of EYFS, children need 3 hours of physical activity a day. And I think there's probably not many children, not many 3 and 4 year olds who are getting 3 hours of physical activity a day. So if we want children to develop, they need to have that physical development. So I think it's really important that we support and encourage parents and make sure parents understand the importance of physical play and physical development, and how they go from those gross motor skills to those fine motor skills, and how that subsequently supports them with their writing, and writing that underpins a lot of the future curriculum that they're going to be undertaking. And the EPI research going back 20 years talked about, and I know I say this all the time, but it talks about it's not enough to create a stimulating environment and let children play. Adults need to actively teach children. So we need to actively teach children the physical development skills, the gross motor skills, because children need to be confident, and some children need much more help to progress to the next step. Some people might not be as confident, they might not have as such strong coordination as part of that. So for every child, it's about knowing where they are on that physical development journey and knowing the next step, and making sure that we give them the time and the support and the encouragement, and that they have opportunities for risk taking to build their confidence. And I know if you look at the playlist that I've set up on Siren Films, some of these look at these physical in the outdoor, it looks at some of these physical opportunities for children as well. But there's lots of videos that explore this, and we need to give children time and space and encouraging words. And if we have children who might be having difficulties with their progression, it's really important that the earliest opportunity you take professional advice about how to support children with physical and mobility needs. So alongside gross motor, or as we move in, children start to develop fine motor skills about getting a grip. So going from those large muscles and those large movements that we talked into small muscles in their body and brain. And the way that they develop that is through both repetition and variation. And it's dependent on gross motor skill development. So they need to have those gross motor skills, and then they move into developing those fine motor skills. And fine motor skills we use all the time, and children use when they're eating, when they're writing, when they're manipulating objects, getting dressed, doing their buttons up as part of that. And a baby uses their fingers and thumbs to pick things up. They put them in their mouth. They feel what they're like. And so that's really important to encourage from that stage. But while we're going to an older children, it's things like putting on a zip or cutting with scissors. And they're really important skills to be developed. So from a very early age, we need to give children opportunities to explore different materials and to start to practice those fine motor skills. So we'll go through and look at some a video about that, and then we'll look at some practical examples.
Physical development is not just about large movements. It's also about mastering smaller movements and gaining control of the hands. Babies have a natural desire to explore objects, to find out what they're like and what they can do. The time they spend exploring them coincides with the development of the muscles of the hands and arms and their hand-eye coordination. Being able to explore things in a playful way motivates children to persevere and push themselves to master a skill. Hand and finger use is encouraged with toys that are quite tiny and need delicate control. Different types of grip develop over time and refine into the pincer grip. This grip is used for all sorts of tool use and manipulation. As well as the hands, the whole arm and wrist is used in many activities. Zoe's using a hand and arm in a very controlled way. It requires lots of concentration, as does this tower building. All these types of fine motor play are essential for developing concentration, as children are motivated to persevere with tasks in their play. These movements need to be carried out carefully, so using hand-eye coordination leads to long attention spans, as children are determined to do things that are difficult for them.
Wow.
Very active children can become quite calm and concentrate well when playing with a fine motor task. Making and creating opens up a world of possibilities for children to be able to express themselves and make a mark on their world. Fine motor play develops the hand's ability to use tools and is essential for being able to effectively use all sorts of tools in life. Francesca's keen to be able to use the scissors, but her muscles aren't quite ready yet.
Squeeze together. 1, 2, 3. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze.
Over time, and with practice at these types of activities, the small muscles in the hand and wrist develop and become coordinated with the eyes, making more skilled and complex activities achievable. Making things often involves other tricky hand-eye coordination skills, as children struggle to fix things together. It can be frustrating, and children need determination to succeed. As these skills become increasingly refined and muscles develop, what children can produce becomes more and more complex.
We need a little gap.
Yes, your mice can get in.
That's what I was thinking.
As well as making things, children learn to use tools to paint, draw and write, as they learn to hold brushes and pens in an increasingly controlled way. Good fine motor control is an important aspect of eventually being able to write. The drive to connect with others and the world motivates children to become increasingly physically skilled and able to produce what they can see in their imaginations. So developing hand-eye dexterity is hugely important for children. The use of the hands enables so many of the higher human functions. It enables children to explore, use tools, create, and write. Crucially, it encourages concentration and perseverance, vital aspects of becoming a self-regulated learner and achieving well in all areas of learning.
I think that video is really interesting because it had lots of different examples of fine motor. And I think we quite often see aspects such as finger gym areas, which of course are really important as part of that. But those opportunities to use those tools and to develop those skills are in every single area. So it's about thinking about that progression of resources and about how with the resources we move from large to small, and with tools how we move from large to small. And I've put a picture of some pom-poms because everywhere I go, they have every single tough tray, I think, in every single setting is full of pom-poms. And if we think about the progression of a pom-pom, so if we think about a pom-pom or a soft ball, for example, or even a small teddy, think about the difference between a child picking up that with their hand. So if we're thinking about that large pom-pom, think about how easy it is to pick it up with your hand, how it becomes harder if the pom-pom gets smaller or if you introduce a tool. So you quite often see pom-poms with large plastic tweezers, and we can see children picking up and sorting those. I think that if we have that kind of activity, think about how we then might want to get children, for example, to sort them by colour. So we might want them to put the green ones in the green bowl, for example. But if we think about, if we've got a tough spot tray or something like that, if we put the green ones, the green bowl on one side and the green so the children, the pom-poms on the other, the children would have to cross the middle line as well with their tools to support them in terms of doing that. But then think about the progressions. So when I was a reception teacher, we had a bit of an obsession in one of my classes. So we had a really large, at the beginning of the week, and it took a whole week and the whole class to do it, we would have a really large cereal bowl full of rice, and the rice would be coloured 3 different colours. So we just coloured it with food colouring, nothing more complicated than that, let it dry, and then we'd start by tipping them in and we'd mix them up in this, and it was a glass bowl so you could see into it, and then there were 3 smaller bowls. And during the course of the week, using metal tweezers, the reception children would sort the grains of rice back out into the individual colours. And I think it's really important that we think about the progression, that we don't just stay with the big pom-poms and the large plastic tweezers, that we think about the progression that we want children to go through in terms of those fine motor skills. So they can do pom-poms with large tweezers, but how many of them can do grains of rice with metal tweezers? And really focusing in on something that takes a lot of time. I was in a school on last Tuesday, I think, and they do a lot with, they were looking at things that require children to move both hands at the same time, which is really important. So that's something like opening a jar would require you to do that, but they have lots of nuts and bolts. So the boys were there threading and unthreading the nuts and bolts and putting multiple nuts on the bolts, but actually they were all quite big. So I said to them, what about the progression about trying to get some really small nuts and bolts? Because I'm sure even as an adult, you sometimes find that really hard. And an interesting thing on that video, I think, as well, was that they had a workshop. We used to have a massive workshop with nails and hammers when I was a nursery teacher. And I remember someone saying to me, but didn't you have injuries? And I could say with quite confidence, the only person ever injured was me, where I managed to hammer my thumb one day. The children were absolutely confident with it. But also we used a softer wood called Geluton or something similar to that. And actually, I was doing some work with some children last year and really motivating some boys. They were outside, but it could have been inside. They had soft Geluton wood, and they had wood screws, long and short screws, and some of them were really long, and they were using screwdrivers and screwing the screws into the wood and then screwing them back out again. So when we talk about that fine motor progression, it doesn't have to be sitting with a pencil doing exercises. It's about those opportunities of things that are going to engage children. Lots of opportunities for finger games. So are finger games and puzzles part of your daily routine? Songs that involve children putting fingers up, showing their fingers, pinching and squeezing. We saw the Play-Doh on there. Play-Doh's really fantastic, encouraging children to pluck the Play-Doh, to roll as part of that. Thinking about paper skills, about not just cutting, but about folding, about actually a child just sitting there with a strip of paper, cutting and practicing with those scissors, and that progression of those scissors from those very loose snips that you can do one-handed and really easily down into scissors, and making sure that you've got left-handed and right-handed as well, and wavy scissors. I think you can just see on the top of the corner of the picture, wavy scissors are much harder to cut with. And you can also, I think, see some single hole punches in the corner there. Again, children love single hole punches, and when you see them starting to use hole punches, they'll quite often have the hole punch flat on the table, and they'll slide the paper in and it'll be a big push down, and by the end, with those single ones, they can do it really confidently in one hand through squeezing. We saw the opportunities for threading. One of the most interesting things is if you get money, and I don't know whether you've ever dropped money on a pavement, but sometimes it can be really hard to pick it up. But even if you put something really flat like money and get children to practice trying to pick it up from a really flat surface, it's a lot harder than it looks, and it really develops that fine motor skills and that progression. About jigsaw puzzles and games as well, because they help children with their fine motor skills, but also with their thinking and their problem solving. And these are some examples. This is a nursery class in a school, and they, every week, and I'm going to show you one of them as we go through, they have a focused short, it's a really short session every week where they focus in on a particular skill with the children. So this is where you can see the adults drawn the lines or drawn the shapes, and the children have practiced cutting them out. And you can see the children at the different stages of their development, from the child who can cut along the wavy lines and follow the pattern and cut the circle and cut the triangle with reasonable accuracy, to the child who couldn't do the concept of the wavy line at all in terms of that. And these children are more or less the same age. And it's about transition over time from using these tools and into these more formal writing tools. And I think the important thing is, again, you can have these within one particular area. You can have a finger gym sort of area, but it's about making sure that these opportunities are threaded in across the provision so that children have opportunities to use them. And so it's not just reliant on them in one place. And it can be just something as simple, as I said, about sitting there, ripping up a piece of paper, crumpling a piece of paper, cutting a piece of paper, the things that require finger and wrist strength and eye muscles and coordination. And then we're moving them in terms of the more formal tools, from things like chunky chalks over time into small pencils. So it's about thinking about the progression and thinking about, as children develop these skills, what's the next stage? What's the next tool and the next size that I want to encourage them into using? And when we're looking at things like cutting lines, it's knowing where to start and knowing where to stop as part of that. We're going to look at really quickly. This video is really short, and then I'll tell you why I've chosen it.
As in, how did you make that too? Where?
So, boys and construction. That's the reason that I chose that to show. You will have boys who want to spend their whole time in construction because that's what engages them. And it is about, again, thinking of that progression of that material. So if we're thinking about things like cars, for example, we start with really big chunky trucks with 2-year-olds going through into smaller cars where children need more control for older children. But if we're thinking about construction, what we saw there was the boys, and in their construction, they were using that hand-eye coordination and they were using that fine motor control and they were using Lego. And I think it's that question about, do we value the fine motor development skills of boys doing Lego as much as we value girls sitting in a writing area with pink pieces of paper colouring in flowers? And it's really important that we do as part of that. But it's also really important that we have that progression in construction as well. I quite often go into lots of reception classes and they have Duplo, and Duplo's fine from a point of, you know, you can tell stories with it, you can do actually that, but actually the age range for Duplo is 2 to 4. And if we really want to have construction that's going to stretch children and move them on, then we need to have some of that smaller construction and some of that Lego as part of it. Some opportunities to follow instructions as well, that they can do basic Lego sets and follow instructions, or images that they can try and build. So actually a photograph of something you've built from Lego, and can they manage to recreate it as part of that? So it's really important that we have those opportunities. And I was in a school, I'm advisor to a school that was judged as outstanding by Ofsted last summer, and it very, very justifiably say. And we did a walk around end of September with the new reception children, and they were just settling in at that point, and they have a construction area in the corner. And as you would expect, last week in September, children who'd come up from nursery, the construction area was full of boys who were building. So there were boys who they were building using the blocks and the equipment in the construction area. And we had a discussion about, there's a risk that children can be engaged in repetitive and low-level play. So how do we manage to take those children forward? Now, the boys were really clearly engaged in that area, and they didn't want to drag the boys out of there into something else, but they wanted to make sure that boys were accessing reading and writing within that area. So they have books across the provision to stimulate the children, and they were already within there clipboards with the idea that the boys would do the writing, but they weren't doing any writing. And there were some pictures and images of different buildings within it. So we had quite a long conversation about how can we encourage children within an area that they already love to extend their thinking, but also to build in writing opportunities. And I went back just before the holidays, and I think it was the same boys in the construction area, but what they were doing was completely different. So what we saw from the minute those boys went in was that they started by grabbing one of the clipboards. One of them was writing the names of the other children, and they were assigning jobs to each other. They were designing out what they were going to make and drawing some pictures and some symbols. They were talking about it. Some of them were just getting on and doing it. Some of them were talking about it. On the wall in the background, there were some basic design plans, sort of showing how things were constructed and how things were built. But there was lots of writing. There was a lot more conversation going on, but there was a lot of writing within that. And there were also boys writing in the maths areas and all of the other areas as well. And so I said to the teacher, well, how did you manage to do this? And I think that what she said really sums it up. So she said, well, first of all, what we do is we value what they're doing in that area. We know that's where we want to be. She said, but after the discussion last time, we realized that we needed to model more. So adults went and spent time in that construction area with the children. They modeled the skills of, let's start by working out who our workforce are. So who have we got here? Let's write down the names of the lists of the people who are here. Let's tick off whether they're here. Let's allocate them jobs. Then they showed the children how to, they talked a lot about engineers and designers to the children, which is part of their curriculum. So they try to develop children to be scientists, to be writers, but to be engineers and designers. So they talked about that to them. They talked about the different roles that people might take on. They talked about how to draw models, and there were symbols. The children were using some of their own symbols as well, instead of words as part of that. And they'd also talked about how designers would go back and evaluate what they'd done, and how they would record afterwards as part of that. So actually, they had made the opportunities for writing absolutely integral to the expectation of what you did when you went into that particular area in the classroom. And it doesn't mean that every boy who went, or every girl, I'm sure girls do go in there as well, it didn't mean that every child who went in there was doing that all of the time, but those writing opportunities were there. And on the day we were there, they were clearly using them spontaneously within that, because they'd had it modelled, because they'd had adults who had spent time sitting in that area with the children, modelling the expectation of what could be done within that area of provision. And that's absolutely important. So we keep coming back time and time again to the importance of the role of the adult in terms of modelling, and the adult in terms of that, of thinking out loud and explaining what they're doing for the children. Oh, I'm the foreman today. I'm writing a list of all of the people who are here. Let's do a roll call. Let's clear out. What are we going to make today? Let's do a sketch of it. So that thinking out loud process for the children, and what that really brought in for them was a purpose to what they were writing and what they were recording. Another example is always bikes and racetracks in schools, and that idea that we set up a system. So rather than having children sitting waiting to go on bikes, we have a checklist where they have to sign themselves in. They put themselves on a list to wait, so opportunities to write their name. It motivates children very quickly to write their name when they can write their name to go on a list to wait to be the next in turn with the timer to go on the bike as part of that. So building those opportunities into writing into the expectations of how we play in these particular areas. So we're going to have a look at a video that looks at fine motor skills and how the practitioner, to particularly look at the role of the practitioner in terms of teaching those skills, because we need to explicitly teach the skills to the children of how to use scissors and things like that.
In the back, please. Okay, Lola, do you need some help? Yeah. I can see it's like really hard, yeah. What are you trying to cut off? That's it. Okay. Make a flower, I can see. Yeah, sorry. Practice open and open and squeeze your fingers together. Can you see? When you open, the paper goes in, and then when you squeeze, it'll push. Okay? Let's try it. Right, so turn the motor keep going that way. Squeeze and open. Squeeze. That's it. Now this hand has to move the paper around. So you have to be extra careful. Can you feel that finger underneath? You don't want the finger to be too close to the shelf. Okay. Squeeze and open. Squeeze. That's it. Like a big crocodile's mouth. Squeeze. And the crocodile likes to eat the paper. Really sharp teeth. It's really heavy. Can you pull it out?
I will make something of it too.
You want to make something too? Have you finished putting? Should we finish this bit first?
Yeah.
Before we work something else?
You know, I've got that one.
Okay, which way do you want the cut then? Do you want to go around that way? Yeah? Yeah. Well done, you've got it. Okay, remember, don't twist it if it's not straight. The crocodile likes to go forwards, doesn't like to go upside down. Oh, you are strong, Laurie. Squeeze. And then, you know what Sam needs to cut the clay, Laurie? Squeeze some string from the trolley. Squeeze. Wow. Look at that shape. You put that shape all the way around. Okay, that was in the pan. Even if you want to do clay, you need to take off your coat. That's really hard to move with a coat and an apron on. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Right, well, let's sit here and see if you can open the top off. You take wire and you have to twist it over. Okay, this is a really small apron reed. You need to have a bigger size apron than the blue one. You know where it is? Lila Rose. Wow. Did you put that whole piece off yourself? Excellent work. Yeah. We'd love for you to do it. Yeah. Okay. Did it work? You know what happens when you use the scissors like this? When you open them and you say this bit here, well, it has to work really hard to open and close and open and close, and it starts to ache a little bit, doesn't it? That's why you have to just keep practicing with your hands, and your hands will get stronger and stronger and stronger. But it's because you've done so much cutting. That's why it's starting to ache. Which bit were you trying to cut? You want to go around there? Are you trying to get the flower off? We'll do the last bit. And then we'll give your hand a rest. You go this way? No, we need to use string. Look in the trolley and see if you can find some string. Yeah. You are just brilliant at cutting. Yes. High five. Excellent work. I'm so proud.
So what we saw in there was we saw a real progression in the skills of that little girl in a really short period of time. We saw the practitioner specifically teaching the skills, and again thinking about that progression when we're thinking about scissor skills and that progression. So there are some children who will just be, you know, short snips to snip up pieces of paper, right down to following a through then starting to cut in straight lines, to starting to follow a wavy line, to cutting around complex shapes, and providing the support for children and teaching children how to use those tools, and making sure that for left-handed children, we give them access to the resources that they need in order to be able to do this. So we're going to move on to think a little bit about mark making and how that now moves into writing. So when we're thinking about really young children, a lot of the mark making that they do also has a really sensory aspect to it. So it might be in foam or in sand, and they start by almost the sensory feel of it and what it feels like, but then they quite often realize that they're making marks, and it can quite often be transient. You know, it can be wiped away as part of that, but then it starts to become more deliberate, and children start to have some recognizable shapes. They might be letter-like. They start to create their own symbols. They might tell you that that mark means this or says this as part of that. They go through a process from scribble to marks, to lines, to circles, encouraged by adults. So we can see here there's a really low level sand tray, which encourages children to pattern and mark make in terms of that. I think what's really important is that it's not a one-off, but a chance to revisit, because there's often a risk with some of these mark making activities that they're put out as a one-off, but children don't come back to revisit them. The whiteboard that's in the picture at the bottom, I was in a school on Monday, and throughout this whole session, this whiteboard is right in the middle of a school nursery, and children write on it all the time. And the writing skills that you need to write against a surface that is horizontal are different to those that you need to write against a surface that's vertical. And if you have a practice yourself just about feeling how different it feels, it is easier to mark make and write if you're writing against a surface like that than against a surface like that. And if you have a go yourself, you'll feel it. You'll feel you're using different muscles in your hands and your wrists as part of that. So it's really important that children have an opportunity to write standing up. They have an opportunity to write on walls. They have an opportunity to do that. And it's not just always flat on surfaces as part of this. So throughout the day, we dipped in at different times, and it was absolutely covered in children's writing. And I said, I'm going to come back and take a picture of that at the end of the day. And then when I came back, the children had done choose it, use it, and put it away. And one of the jobs was wiping the whiteboard off. So unfortunately, I didn't capture it, but it was one of the busiest areas used throughout the day. And because it was right in the middle of the setting, adults talked about it a lot, and it was really valued. And we saw some nice language and adult modelling of that writing as well throughout the day. Just another quick.
Come on, it's your turn. We're gonna turn because the magic's coming from me. So, how did it go? I kept saying.
Oh, you can write your name in this. Like this. Stephen, you need to write Philip and footprint stuff. Philip. Yeah, you see what he's now. Not good. Can you make your footprint, son?
I love that video because I love how responsive the practitioner is to the child when the sand goes onto the floor. But what you could see within there was children who really low sand in a tray, children who were using their hands to mark make, but the little boy who'd started to use tools, you could see how he was holding the tool in order to mark make. But what came there, we saw in that video, was again the support of the practitioner in terms of that, and when it went down onto the floor, it wasn't a problem, it was another opportunity for learning within that. So as children start to, mark making is really important because they start to attribute meanings to their marks. And as they start to do that alongside developing the dexterity and the sort of skills that they need in order to be able to hold tools or pens in order to mark, they start to recognize and write a few letters. They might be random to begin with, and it becomes more systematic. They might include pictures. You see quite a lot of pictures and symbols. So in early writing, you'll see quite a lot of children, and they'll draw a mark and they'll tell you what the mark represents. They might be starting at this point left to right, and we'd be encouraging them to think about that as the writing convention when they're doing some of that mark making. You start to see as they develop, they start to use some recognizable letter shapes, and they might start to tell you what that letter is, particularly if it's a letter included in the letters of their name. So it's very good at telling you that. And then they move on to emergent writing, where they have strings of letters. And then that moves into they might move into a code, for example. So they might put DG in instead of dog. And as children become older, they're starting to learn, when they move into reception, they're starting to use the phonic conventions. So they're starting to study phonics and understand the symbols that recognize that represent the sounds as part of that. And as they start to do that, they develop into written text where some words might be spelled correctly, but some aren't as part of that. And then as they go through, it's only really as they start to move out of the foundational stage and into key stage 1 that they start on more of that structure about moving from single words to short sentences and captions into simple, short written pieces as part of that. And they start some of the conventions around capital letters and full stops. And going back to when we saw the early learning goal at the beginning, that was the expectation for the children by the end of reception, was not that they are going to be writing reams and reams and pages, but they're going to be at the very early stages of that independent writing. So what do we need to do in terms of supporting that early writing development? So if we're thinking about children under 2, it's about those sensory activities that might then move into mark making. It's about sharing books. It's about developing that understand that print carries meaning. It's about developing their language, vocabulary, repeating words, playing lots of finger games, that large scale mark making. All of those are the early stages of writing. At this point, they haven't picked up a tool, they haven't picked up a pencil or a pen at all. When we go into 2 and 3-year-olds, carries on the importance of that language, that development, that vocabulary, that talking to children, so they understand the conventions of speech, they understand about sentences, they start to understand from people's voice tone when they're being asked a question, about retelling those favourite stories and events and getting children to retell part of it and join in if they can with it, about drawing lines, dots and circles, a game that I often play when I go into nurseries with sort of 2-year-olds and just 3-year-olds is I get a big pen, a big marker pen and a piece of paper or a roll of piece of paper, and I'll put a dot and they have to try and draw a circle around it. And you get to know the pace of the children quite quickly. So you can end up doing it quite quickly with some of the children, or I'll draw a dot and another dot, and they have to try to draw a line before I've drawn the next dot as part of that. So all of those things that are encouraging that mark making, but moving into control of mark making as they move towards to be 3 and 4-year-olds. So we're developing all the way from 2 to 4, that gross and that fine motor development, that physical development, that communication and understanding. And it's when they move to 3 and 4 really that they start to behave more like writers. They can increasingly have control around the marks that they make. We might see more lines and shapes. They show an understanding, particularly when it relates to them. And they understand that print carries meaning, but still the importance of orally storytelling. So they're understanding the conventions. They're starting to make attempts to write familiar letters, and they're really continuing still with that gross and fine motor development, and remembering that children will be at different stages. So you might have 4-year-olds who will still need some of that really basic gross and fine motor support. And it's then when they move into reception, be looking at that 4 to 5-year-old, that they carry on needing that fine motor development. Some of them will still need a lot of that gross motor development, but it's at that point that they start to learn phonics and the next set, if you want, of the tools that take them forward to be writers. Name writing. I've put name writing as separate. Name writing is really important because name writing is what gives us, it's our identity. We saw the little girl in the video, didn't we, saying write her name and write her mom's name as part of that. So children understand their name and they know their name is really, really important. And if we're thinking, and so children, it will often be one of the very first things that they want to write going forward, and they'll show a real interest in that, and they'll ask you how to write their name. And we often ask them, you know, put your name on this or write your name on that, or I'll put your name on your picture and then you can take it home for dad as part of that. So it really has a personal and a social significance. So children often learn to write their name as one of the very first things that they can write. And this is a school. I'm going to show you the next thing they do. They have it's a school nursery, and these are 3-year-olds, but they follow a form. They follow a drawing program. So I'm going to show you the drawing program as we go forward. But I just wanted to show you this little girl's writing development, because this is in a really short period of time. I think there's less than a month between these, because writing her name was really important to her. And so her writing developed, and she learnt to write her name, because that was part of her identity. And we can support children with that. We can have name cards so they can copy their names. We can write them as adults. We can talk to them about the letters that sit within their names. But I would say that, as you know, when children start to show an interest and they ask you, how do I write my name? What does it look like? Show it and model to them, because it is really, really important, because it's part of that sense of identity and that part of that sense of belonging. This is the drawing. So this is the same school from the writing of the names. And why this is really interesting is that they started a formal, and I use that drawing program in nursery. And they started it, they have a very short session. It's only 5 minutes, probably once a week. And they go through a progression of drawing. So you can probably just see in it what they're going to draw. So in the first one, it's a car, and and then they write their name and they draw as well. And in the second one, it's the bear. And all of the children access this, but they're at different stages. And you can see at the top, I think the adult's written a handwriting grip of one of them as part of that. But it's not just this is a picture, copy it. They've really carefully thought about the movements that they want to make. So when this is being taught, talk to the children about how to draw the wheel of the car and make the circle in a clockwise or an anti-clockwise motion in terms of that, thinking about how that's going to support them as they move into writing letter shapes. So actually the adult is drawing alongside the children in this session, and she is modeling for the children how to draw this. And as a result of that teaching of these skills and that modeling, these are pictures that have been drawn by 3-year-olds, and they have and it is drawing as a first step towards developing those writing skills. So it's supporting children to develop that pencil control and that fine motor control. It's done with a big chunky pen in a book. So but also it's about really thinking about which patterns do we want to practice and develop, which are going to help them move forward into their writing. And I've got a lot of settings that I work with in nursery age who are currently looking at developing drawing with children. And they've had some really, really good outcomes from it. And I think you can see from this one, and when we looked through the books it's in a book, each child has a book, you could really see the development of that children's pencil control, their ability to follow instructions, and you could see the drawings and become more recognizable over time. And the children were really, really enjoying the session as well as part of that. It's really important that children see adults modeling everything, but they also see adults modeling writing. It's about that thinking aloud process. I always say, you know, it's where if you didn't have a group of children around you, you'd feel really self-conscious, but it's that talking aloud that you do from the very first stages when you've got a baby, but you're explaining all the time what you're doing and the decisions. Oh, I think I need to make a list of the children who would do this. Oh, I've been asked to work out, to count how many bears we have. Let's go and make a list and let's go and record that in some way. Or I need to fill in this form that has to go to here. Let's talk about how we're going to do that. So thinking out loud, talking through the process. Should I use this pen or that? Oh, I wonder. Let me go back and start at the beginning of the line. I'm writing from this side of the page to that side of the page. So thinking about the decisions that you're making when you're writing, thinking about, you know, scribing for children and recording stories that children tell you, but talking through that process. Because by thinking aloud and modeling what we're doing, so every opportunity that we need to write in front of children, talk to them about what we're doing and why, and explain the process of thinking, because that helps them develop their process of thinking as writing. So it helps children to understand language patterns, to solve problems and to make sense of their experiences. And by listening to children talking and modelling how to write down the words, helps children to see their sounds on paper. So offer to write it down for children. If a child comes to you with a piece of paper, let me write it down for you. Would you like now to have a go? Do you want to add something onto that? About opportunities to make writing really, really purposeful. across the provision. And it goes back, I think, to what I talked about those boys in the construction, that it needs to be embedded into what the expectation, and it needs to be embedded into and children need to be taught how to actually do it. See, quite a lot of role play, and someone will have spent a lot of time making resources for children to write in a cafe or write a shopping list, but it hasn't been modelled for the children, and as a result they don't know how to use it. So it's really important that adults model how to write for that particular purpose. And loads of opportunities. So if you've got space, and not everybody does, is there space for if you've got a little space to create for a writing area? I think we've probably got some pictures of some as we go through, but it's not just about having white pieces of A4 paper and pencils. It's about having really interesting different papers, cards to write on, small little things, little books, letters, notes, note boards. Quite a lot of schools will have a notice board, a post-it notice board, and children can write messages on there, and adults can write messages on for children, and the message gets stuck up and the reply is written as part of that. Having opportunities to sign up for things, putting captions or children can put captions on their work, they can write their name. When we're looking about role play, about what are the practical opportunities for writing within there, because if we get writing that has a purpose, children engage so much more within that. About other things which encourage writing provision, things like maps, map making and map drawing. Is a really useful skill in terms of that. Children love jokes and opportunities to tell jokes and write jokes at this age as well. About one of the things that I discovered with my own son, who was a very reluctant left-handed writer, and still now at 25 is a very reluctant left-handed writer, was that when he was little, if I gave him a clipboard and a helper badge, he would do absolutely anything. And that's worked well with all the children I've ever worked with. If they have a badge that says they're a helper and a clipboard, and they're with you as an adult, and can you just write that down for me? Can you just record that for me? And it's really important that children need to see adults writing. They need to see adults modeling and writing all the time. And that's not just writing on a whiteboard, but it's writing with different materials, with different pens, with different materials, but writing all the time, so that children see adults writing and they see the importance of writing. These are some examples. This is the reception class. Looking at this, it's two reception classes actually in one. You can see their mark making and writing areas. That's the first of those pictures. Again, they've got one of those whiteboards where children can write standing up as part of that. In all of their areas, they have books to stimulate the children to read and to stimulate the children to write from that. There's a whole different range of pens. Everything is stocked up all of the time. They haven't run out of paper. There's post-it notes. The power of the post-it note, the power of the coloured paper is, you can't quantify that. It really, really engages children. And there's a table there for them to go and sit at and write at if they want to as well. But even when we're looking at that different area, we can see there's whiteboards for them to mark, make and write. There's pencils. The pencils are sharp. There's a range of different materials for them. We can see, books to stimulate their writing as well. Clipboards for the children to write and the children to move around with. Opportunities for children to move around with, to have portable writing kits, to have caddies and to have boxes and to have bags. It doesn't need to be anything more complicated than a little bag with writing materials that children can take around with them and write. But opportunities really to practice basic skills everywhere across the provision. To watch another little video.
Oh, take it off. Oh, big orange. Now, orange now, big orange now.
I think you need to write your mummy a shopping list, Heidi.
No.
Don't you?
No.
No. Yeah. Why don't you write mummy a shopping list?
Yeah.
You need to say oranges. You need to write oranges and pasta.
Yeah.
On the shopping list, don't you?
Yeah.
Let's see, you were saying.
My mummy and daddy.
Yeah. So if you write a shopping list, and then you'll be able to give it to mummy and daddy when they go to the shops, won't you?
Yeah.
So what did you want them to buy?
Circle. Circle.
Well, that could be the orange, couldn't it? Is that the orange? Oh, is that Heidi?
Yeah, and the rail, and the long rail, and long rail, and long legs, and I go home with the orange. Now, and then circle.
Heidi with a whale, is it?
Yeah.
It's me. Should we write your name on it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
You're going to write your name? Okay.
Yeah.
Huff for Heidi.
Five.
You can see where there's a huff for Heidi. Look. See that?
Yeah.
Huff.
But Mommy, Daddy, Heidi. And Mommy, Daddy, Heidi.
That's lovely writing, Heidi.
Then Mommy, Daddy. Yeah, Heidi. Heidi and Daddy. Yeah,
Heidi and Daddy.
yeah, and Heidi writing.
Yes, you've done some lovely writing, haven't you?
Mommy and Daddy. That, Mommy.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, so Mummy's gone to the shops on her own, has she?
Yeah.
Not got anybody to help
Yeah.
her.
There.
The shop's over there, is it?
Yeah. Okay.
So you're going to take your shopping list with you then,
Yeah.
just in case you forget.
Yeah. I
There's the
got it.
shopping list.
I'll put it there. Put it there. Put it there. Hey, okay. Okay.
Oh, you're going to pay, are you? So what did you buy?
Tomatoes
You bought your tomatoes.
and pasta.
Yes. You bought your tomatoes and your pasta. Did you forget something?
No.
Are you sure?
No.
I think there was something else on your shopping list. What did you forget?
Orange.
Yeah. Oh no, you have to go back to the shop now.
No.
You'll have to go back and get your orange, won't you? Go back in.
And orange and pasta cake.
You're going to buy orange now, are you?
That is orange. That is orange.
Daddy wants the oranges, does he? Okay, so you've got everything now, have you? You're going to drive back home then?
Yeah.
Bye-bye. I loved that video in terms of how we could see how, I mean, if we think about where she was in terms of her speech and language development, but it was that holistic approach where her writing skills were being and her mark making were being developed at the same time. And we saw her attributing meaning to marks. And we also saw her interest and fascination in writing her name. And I think I talked earlier about how engaged children can be in writing their names. This is a nursery. Again, you can see that they have a really clear area for marking that's really well resourced, and why I've put the picture of the sand tray in there. This isn't they have deep sand as well, but this is a shallow sand which enables mark making as part of that. And quite often that sand will be wet, so the children can mark make in wet sand. And again, the importance of seeing painting as part of the provision that supports children to develop that fine motor skills and that mark making into that. These are pictures from a school in which I've spent a lot of time. And these are nursery children and they're all boys. It wasn't intended to be all boys. It was just that it really engaged boys. So what they had was a giant roll of paper and they had pens that were invisible until the light was shone upon it. And they spent hours and hours absolutely fascinated by this and mark making and then using the UV light to show their their writing. And it was an activity that really, really deeply engaged them. And they were a group of boys who were really hard
maybe to engage in writing. You can see one of them's written on his hand and illuminated that as part of it. But I think it's about, you know, thinking about things that are going to engage your individual children. And again, this wasn't a one-off. The light and the pen stayed as part of the provision that they could access afterwards. And I've put some questions that I always think about, because one of the things that you always need to do as part of this when you're thinking about it is to stand back from your own provision and reflect and say, okay, how well is the provision that we've got working? Which children are using it? How are they using it? And how could we manage to make it better? So asking questions and thinking about, so what writing have we got that really encourages boys? Are they writing all the way across the provision, or are they writing in certain areas? And what is it about that? And how could we maybe take some aspects of that somewhere else? About, you know, really saying, can we see adults writing alongside children and really modelling those opportunities? About scaffolding writing, we couldn't see it on that video, but they clearly had the letters up because she pointed to the first letter of Heidi for her, didn't she? So what's in place to support children and scaffold their writing, particularly as they move into reception and they're starting to learn those phonics actually? Are they available for them to use to support themselves in their independent writing? And a really important one for me is, how are adults scribing for children, and how are they scribing for children? Because I think I talked at the beginning about that bottleneck, but we see a real bottleneck with children where they've learnt the conventions of writing. They want to tell stories, they want to write, they're starting to recognize the letters, they're starting to have an idea about what they want to put down on paper, but they just can't scribe it and capture it at that moment. So really important for me that adults are writing for children when children want them to write for them. This is a little video about boys writing and engaging boys.
Lives. What's something here in lives? Grandma? You want them? What are you going to tell them? I'm going to down. I can write it. Live. You write on your finger? What's the next one? Miguel. I don't Let's go. There we go. My favorite. Your favorite fish on the top. And now what? What were you writing?
So I think it explains in the explanation around that video, there are two boys who were relatively newly arrived, and they were writing a letter to their grandmother. So what were they doing? They were writing outside. They had loads of space. They were lying on their tummies, but they were actually writing in a book with a pencil on lines. It was clearly a read writing school because they had the rewriting mnemonics there to support them as part of that. But we saw how engaged they were. They were reception as well. We saw how engaged they were with their writing and how the support of the adult was there for them.
A little bit about handwriting and how we move from growing out of mark making into scribbling and drawing. Most children develop either a left-handed or a right-handed use from about the age of 4 to 6. If we'd been talking about this 40 or 50 years ago, left-handed children would have been encouraged to be right-handed children. And I'm sure you all probably know an adult. In fact, I was talking to a head teacher yesterday who's left-handed and said his handwriting's so terrible because at school they always made him write with a right-handed grip. But we need to teach left-handed children differently. We need to teach them the strategies they need to live in a predominantly right-handed world. So we need to teach them that there are left-handed scissors and what they look like, and to make sure they choose the right ones. We need to make sure they've got them. We need to make sure when they move up to the next class or the next room that the adult moving knows that this is a left-handed child and they've got the resources, and we need to remind them to pick up those scissors. We might need to look at different pencil grips. They need to angle their paper differently in order to help them write it. Sometimes lifting a corner and an angled board can help. They need space. Quite often when you sit and see left-handed children writing in classes, their arm is going straight into the arm of the right-handed child who's next to them, so they don't have enough space. So think about where, if they're sitting writing at tables, where you position the left-handed child and indeed the right-handed child, and you might need to think about individual grips for them. But it's really important that we make sure that we identify left-handed children when we can, and that we give them as early as we can, and that we give them the support that they need in terms of that. Developing a grip. These are some not very good pictures of my hand taken earlier. There's a process about in terms of developing a grip, and children don't necessarily go through all of these stages. But in order to become fluent writers who can write quickly, they really need to have that free-flowing triangulation tripod grip. And I'm laughing at these pictures because I'm sure in addition to these, you've all seen children who will hold their pen or their pencil or their tool in a completely different way from all of these as well. But understanding where they are on that stage of development and trying when the time's right to encourage them to think about how to hold their writing implement, their pen, their chalk, their pencil, moving them through the stages of development in terms of that, and modelling how to hold the pencil, but recognising that they won't be able to do that until they've got that hand-eye coordination. Thinking about how we develop that this tripod grip. You need to be able to have your fingers working together to hold the pencil. So they need to be able to do that. You need to think about the thick or the thin pencil and what works best for each child. We tend to start with thick pencils and move to thinner ones, but actually some children can be better with a thinner pencil right from the start. About really developing that pincer grip, which is going to help them doing that. Sometimes we can do things like putting spots or eyes on the places we want them to hold the pencils. We can have commercial grips. Sometimes actually just putting a lump of Play-Doh on and getting them to grip around that and seeing where they make that grip and encouraging them can be really helpful. And I would say for children, just experimenting and finding what works best with each individual child. And once you've found what works better for them, encouraging them to choose that and use that when they're using their independent writing. So after, so we've developed our fine motor skills, we've developed our gross motor skills, we've got our mark making, we're starting to move that into more letter shapes as part of that. But in order to become fluent writing, children need what we call secretarial skills. So they need to have spelling, handwriting and presentation. They need to have those encoding skills. They need to have phonics. They need to understand that phoneme grapheme correspondence. They need to know which symbols represent which sound units. They're moving towards that in terms of reception. And we talk about them needing to crack the code, which enables them to do that because they want to write the words that come from their everyday speech, but they don't yet have the phoneme, the phonics knowledge to enable them to do that. So cracking the code starts with single letter phonemes and moves on to graphemes. And then they move on to larger units and spelling patterns. And this doesn't just happen in early years foundation stage, this is taking them into key stage 1 as they move forward. And the key to all of that is that that the secretarial skills, the spelling, the handwriting and presentation need to be specifically taught. Children need to have time to practice, and they need to have time to apply those skills. And there's a lovely little drawing in the corner there. I don't know whether you can see, but as the caterpillar goes round, the child started to learn their own system, and they reverse the letters as they go round as part of that. We need to teach children that writing goes from left to right on the page as part of that. And it's really important going that to, this is the point at which children who don't yet have the ability to hold that pencil and to write those letter shapes fluently may become more reluctant writers at that point, because they see that they can see themselves as failures. So it's really important that the skills of being a writer, of being able to retell that story, of being able to tell somebody what to write, isn't lost at this point, because children don't have those secretarial stages of spelling, handwriting and presentation. So the role of the adult becomes really important at this point about how we might scribe for children, how we might write for them, how we support them. And these are some examples of some beginner writers. It's a talk for writing school. So it's quite important to already rehearse with children. What do you want to write? And so they can talk out loud about what they want to write. You can think about how many words it is as part of that, that they start to understand the rules of layout and sentence construction, that we start at one side of the page and work across as part of that, that we leave. That they can use word banks and support. The worst thing is, if I was to say to you, write something now, you'd go, oh no, what? So you know, they need support. Cold writing is really, really hard. One of the things that I often do when I'm asked to work with groups of children is about prompts and stimulus. So I'll have something like a red TED or something where I know they can use the phonics for that. And we'll sit there and we'll talk about what we can think. It can really help reluctant writers, because some children, yes, of course, they can write from that imagination, but for some children they become much more confident writers when they have something really concrete in front of them that they're actually writing about. So think about something that would reflect the phonics knowledge that they have at that moment in time. About giving them word banks and giving them support as part of that as well. You can see in this writing that actually the days of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, was something that was available for them as part of that. And some of them used it and copied them, and some of them didn't as part of that. Starting to teach those capital letters and full stops, and they will start to put those in, but they won't necessarily do it in a sequential way. I'm sure you've all seen children who put a full stop at the end of every single line in terms of their writing. And at this stage of their beginner writing, their writing is often still very much from their own personal experience and all about them. But they need to have regular opportunities to do it. Just like phonics, they need to have regular opportunities to write, to develop that fluency and that automaticity in their writing in the same way as their reading. And it's really important at this stage that they keep their motivation. So it's not about overcorrecting or over marking. So marking needs to be really selective if we're marking in books at this stage. So we're not suppressing them or making them feel unconfident as writers. It's about the encouragement at this point. So for children who don't yet have the phonics knowledge but who really want to write, adult scribing, using shared writing, adult writing for a class or a group and the children contributing back. Some children might just, encouraging the writing, you might just say, just put the first letter and then we'll talk about the rest of it. So they might just record the initial sounds and reads it back to the adult, but they'll read the whole word that they planned and not just the initial sound. When children, lots of children don't want to get it wrong. They're really scared at this stage to get it wrong. Say to them, if you're not really sure about the sound, put a magic line in and then we can talk about it afterwards. So the adult might go back and help them fill them in, because sometimes children who are scared of getting it wrong just won't do it. About adults completing, so the child starts, but if the process is too laborious, they dictate to an adult who finishes it. So they have an opportunity to write everything down that they want, and it's not just reliant on how fast they are within the time given. About using word banks, about not being afraid to use IT for children, because we want them to be writers. So as soon as they want to write, but they don't necessarily have those secretarial skills at that point, we can definitely use IT to support them in terms of that. and just encouraging children to apply their phonic knowledge, but also to have a go in terms of their spelling. So we're reaching the end in terms of the conclusions. This is a picture from the same school that did the writing program. This is a drawing of a panda by just a 4-year-old in terms of that, who'd been through their drawing program as part of this. So they'd drawn the panda as part of the group, and then the child had gone on to add their own symbols and explain the meaning of those to the children. So just to remind you that you can go back and look at, you'll receive a copy of the PowerPoint, you can go back and look at the videos on Siren Films if you want to have a look at them, and there are a lot more of them. I'll set up the playlist within Siren Films to have a look at. But the things that I want you to take away and think about in terms of it are these, really. That it doesn't just happen. It's like everything in early years. We can't just plan this amazing environment and think that it's just going to happen. It needs to be planned and it needs to be purposeful. We need to think about where children are on that development journey. The role of the adult is absolutely crucial in this. It's the same with everything else. Children will be at different places in their development, but it's about knowing where that child is on their developmental journey and thinking from where this child is, what is the next step that I need to do for this children? So for some things, it will be about gross motor, it will be about fine motor. For some children, it will be about teaching them that, you know, how to hold the pencil. It will be about their language development. It will be about teaching them the phonics as they move forward to that stage. So children will be at really different points, and it's about needing to know where every child is and what the next step is for them. What do we need to do to take this child forward in terms of their writing development? So what's the next step in their writing development, and how can we support this? Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I hope that you found it useful. Please do access some of the videos and have a look at them, and I hope to meet you again in the future.